It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Yes, it's time for RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, filling in for your regular host, Sean Haney. He is on some well-deserved holidays this week, spending some time with family. And so you have me. And yes, it's Wednesday. It's August 23rd. It's hump day. It's time to talk markets. But before we get to markets, we got a couple other things to cover too. So on today's show, super excited about this lineup. You're going to hear from me because I've got a few things I want to cover agronomically that's happening out on the landscape, specifically frost. Yes, I know. The F word. But also, we've got a fascinating interview with Colin Rosengren on intercropping. He's out of Saskatchewan. Some really cool stuff there. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk markets. Neil Townsend of GrainFox, he's going to join me later in the show to talk about what's going on globally and, of course, right here in our backyard. And I've got Kelvin Heppner's interview with Rick Rutherford talking about proving technology on a field scale. So enough with the small plots, enough with the, research in a lab kind of thing. Let's bring a big full field scale and make it a proving ground. It's pretty cool. All right, let's get to the show. We're going to take a quick break and I will be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
At the 2023 Canadian Beef Industry Conference, RealAg Radio did a live broadcast in front of the audience, and we focused on managing your farm business through adversity. We're talking right now to Todd Miller. He is CEO of Tech Canada. Todd, I want to hit on decision making. What are some suggestions you have in terms of making good decisions during very stressful times?
The pre-existing solution to all problems lies within the questions you ask. So in essence, if you can find yourself in a room with like-minded individuals, regardless of industry, the process to follow is to really say, how do I do this? And state that very, very clearly. Give a little bit of background and state why it's important. Make sure that everyone has a vested interest in just what you're trying to accomplish and start probing each other and really asking really deep questions, and all of a sudden, an answer prevails. The pre-existing solution to all problems lies within the questions you ask.
Introducing the all-new Xerion 12 Series tractor by Kloss. Redesigned from the ground up to redefine the high-capacity four-wheel drive market. With 653 max horsepower, industry-leading hydraulic flow, a silky smooth CVT, a powerful TerraTrack undercarriage, and a quiet, comfortable cab with 20% more legroom. More than just power. The all-new Xerion by Kloss.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host on this Wednesday, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Co-op. When it comes to the productivity and efficiency of your operation, every decision counts. One of those decisions is how you fuel your equipment. You need to be sure that it will run efficiently and without unnecessary downtime. Count on Co-op and your local Co-op fuel team to keep your equipment running smoothly with seasonally blended, high-quality fuels and premium lubricants with guaranteed performance. We are Western Canadian. We are fueling harvest. We are Co-op. All right. It seems a bit strange, for me at least, having moved to Ontario years ago, to really even think about the F word, that is frost, in August. But yes, it happens, and far more often, we'll have pockets of frost that happen sometime in August, often early September, all over Western Canada. We did, as I mentioned in yesterday's show, there were reports of some light frost hitting certain pockets of Alberta over the weekend, and it does bring up the question, really, on canola. Do you, if there is frost in the forecast, are you better off to swath or leave it standing? I'm not the canola expert, but there are some really great resources out there that can certainly help with this decision, or even just recognizing what's the risk. So what are we mostly worried about when we're talking about frost on canola that's not quite ready? We're worried about green seed and green seed lock. So that means green in the seed that is simply not going to pass. It's not going to end up clearing from the seed. And so you end up with green seed, and that can end up costing you at the elevator. So the question becomes, do you swath if there's frost in the forecast? Realistically, the decision is probably comes down to what stage is the crop at, for sure. So how close is it? How much potential green seed is there? And how sure are you that a frost is going to happen? That's one of the key things to think about. And how hard of a frost is being forecasted, because and if you head on over, so there's two main resources that I of course always turn to. We've got our canola school on YouTube or on RealAgriculture.com. You can go to canolaschool.com. It has all of our videos there. You can search the archives there for any of the videos we've done on this question. But the Canola Council of Canada, of course, also has some great resources as well. So if you would like, you can head on over and check out Canola Watch as well. There's some really great discussions there on. So the biggest issue is that if you've got a hard frost, so that's below -2 degrees C for probably, a significant length of time, you really do need to do an assessment after the fact, and you're looking for actual frost damage. So pods that turn white, pods shatter, those sorts of things. So if you're noticing after a hard frost that you've got a lot of pod damage, you may want to swath right away to preserve yield. Because, of course, if you're not super worried about green seed, we are, of course, going to be worried about pod shatter, and we're worried about loss. Okay. So the other thing is, if you've got potentially very immature seed and you've got a lighter frost, you may essentially lock in green by swathing when you probably could have let it stand and it's just a light frost and much of that was going to clear. So there's no slam dunk easy answer on this one for sure. But you have to take into account, if the crop is very close to being mature, you might want to wait, but you might need to be ready to swath if you end up with a hard frost and you've got some pod shatter happening or could happen. So you don't want to lose yield that way. But if the crop is quite immature, if you're anticipating frost and you swath and the frost doesn't happen, or it really wasn't that bad, you actually potentially could have sort of shot yourself in the foot. So I don't know, and we've had this conversation many times with some really great agronomists, asking, should you swath ahead of a frost? Very rarely, I think, would they tell you to do that, just because then you've essentially, you've drawn a line in the sand, and anything that was green at that point potentially you may end up with more green than you would have if you had just rolled the dice and taken the chance. So that's a consideration. But all of the resources will tell you if a frost happens, especially one that snuck up on you, or one that was perhaps quite early, like this one last weekend in Alberta, head out there the day after, a couple days after, and scout and see what kind of damage you might be looking at. Of course, very immature crops and a hard frost, you could be looking at, absolute seed destruction. So where the seed would just had too high of moisture and it ends up freezing and it's just non-viable anymore. But that's a pretty extreme case. So a light frost with a crop that's just about mature, really the biggest issue is going to be whether or not you should head on in there and swath immediately to save yields from pod shatter. But realistically, just know that you run the risk of potentially locking in that green. What can you do with green seed? Well, I would love, actually, we had this a couple of years ago. I want to say it was 2014, which was a long time ago now, but I think we had one year sooner than that, where there was quite a bit of green seed. I think I've seen perhaps the hint of some discussion on green soybean seed in certain parts of Manitoba as well. Definitely never a good thing. Don't want to see it. But if it's not a lot, if it's if it's sort of in one area, usually the elevator systems can deal with it. But definitely it's something that we want to try to avoid if we can. But if it, let me know if you were one of those farmers that happened to get hit by frost. Let me know what decision you took. Did you let it stand and take some of those shattering losses? Did you swath it? Were you going to swath it anyway? And this was sort of just the impetus to do it, because that is always a consideration. All right, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm really excited actually about this conversation. It's a super cool one. We're going to talk about intercropping in Saskatchewan. It's a practice of growing two crops on the same fields. And we've got Colin Rosengren from Saskatchewan who's going to join the show and talk about intercropping on his farm. He's been doing it for quite some time. It's pretty cool. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Kochia sucks.
Big time. And hate it. Really gets in the way. Awful.
But not anymore. Get a head start on tough-to-kill weeds like kochia this fall with Volterra EZ and Fierce EZ soil-active herbicide. Apply after harvest before freeze-up for up to 8 weeks of extended control in pulses, soybeans, and wheat next spring. Volterra EZ, Fierce EZ for kochia. Visit newfarm.ca/kochia.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Wednesday, August 23rd. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by the pre-emergent soil-active herbicides Volterra EZ and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray this fall for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control next spring. Find out more about New Farm products at newfarm.ca. All right, as promised, and this is pretty cool, little known fact, intercropping is a pretty cool practice. And if you've never seen it, it's pretty cool. It's the idea that instead of growing one crop after another, which would be relay cropping, where there's maybe some overlap, or a monocrop, meaning one crop type across an entire field. Intercropping is a mix. It's two or more annual crops growing in the same field, often planted at the same time, perhaps not planted exactly in the same pass, but usually harvested all at the same time and then separated after. It's pretty darn cool. And in Canada, if you've ever heard of intercropping, you've probably heard of Colin Rosengren. Now, I'm one of those lucky people who one of the first years Colin was doing this, I got to tour his farm. And let me tell you, a lot has changed since those first couple years of trying it out. And so Sean Haney actually traveled out to near Mydale, Saskatchewan, where Colin farms, and took a tour of some of the fields and captured some of what Colin has learned in the more than 10 years that he's been intercropping. And so this is the latest segment of Profitable Practices. It's a video series we're doing with RBC Royal Bank and Farm Credit Canada. And so we're highlighting different farms across Canada that are doing some pretty cool stuff that, yes, make sense financially, but just so happen to have some added benefits for people and the planet.
Hi, I'm Sean Haney with Real Agriculture. Welcome to Profitable Practices. Today, we're in Mydale, Saskatchewan, and we're at the farm of Colin Rosengren. We're going to look at how he's incorporating some profitable practices into his farm, in particular, his focus and his use of intercropping to provide not only higher levels of sustainability, but also economic return. Let's go take a look.
Colin Rosengren, a third-generation farmer at Mydale. I graduated University of Saskatchewan in '97 and been farming before that and after that and all along, I guess.
Okay, what kind of crops are you growing?
We grow a wide variety of crops, usually about 10 different crops each year. Different mixes of different ones. I guess basically pulses and oilseeds have been our most common ones to mix up in different intercrops.
What is intercropping?
Well, I guess that'd be growing 2 or more crops in the same field. I usually consider it as both or all the crops for cash purposes for harvest to consider it intercropping.
So I got to ask, it's unique. There are people that are doing it. How did you get started intercropping?
I guess the big thing was kind of an economic driver. Back in 2004, the prices were quite low. Canola $6, peas less than $4. Just trying to figure out a way of getting extra yield and lower input costs at the same time. And then a lot of it was observations that we'd seen anytime we see volunteer crops coming in another crop. It always did a lot better. Head of volunteer durum in a barley field, for example, and the head will be full 8-10 row, the best head of durum you'll ever see. So just recognizing that there was an opportunity for another crop to succeed within a monoculture situation led us think maybe we should plan that and put some more of something else in there. It's
a little bit of a mind bender. We're used to, we'll call it monocropping. This is polycropping, I guess we should call it. What do you think it is that creates this 1 + 1 = 3 sort of scenario?
Well, I kind of often end up flipping that around and what makes us think we should grow just one. If we go out there to any natural system, we'll never find just one plant growing because there's always opportunity of time and space and resources that's more diverse and spread out. And so to try and design a single crop to use everything at that same time doesn't match the supply and demand curve, I guess. So anything we can do to flatten out that demand curve of our crop by spreading out multiple crops is going to help us to match the supply better.
Now, a lot of people, I think, jump to harvest. Okay, but I want to back it up here because actually the seeding to me actually is a little bit even more interesting and maybe a little bit more complicated. Talk about what happens at seeding time in order to end up with what we see here is multiple crops in the same field.
Well, we've adapted that practice over the years as well, but it's not that it's not complicated or require major stuff. Like I said, we did it just about 20 years ago in 2004, and so we did it then with flexi-coil drill with 2 carts. We had a toe between and a toe behind, and so we had 4 compartments and away we went. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Currently we use a seed tender so that we can have 5 separations out to the drill. And we still operate, the one drill has a toe between and toe behind cart giving us 6 compartments. So we've got capability of metering 6 products, and the other drill we modified so that it has 5 metering tanks on it, on the Seed Hawk. So it's just multiple compartments and just one more layer, one more product. It doesn't really add any total volume. So
you're even taking this to another level, and you're doing variable rate seeding throughout the field. That's even more of a complexity added on here. Talk about the why of doing that.
Well, yeah, I guess we've always handled our products separately. So we always did our fertilizer products separate too, and handle our nitrogen separate from phosphorus, separate from sulfur. And the reason being because we recognize the same area of the field doesn't need more of all of them. You have to kind of vary those separately if you're going to do a variable rate management, because each site of the field needs different amounts of each. It's similar, I guess, some of the observations we had, like this crop, for example, is pea, canola, lentil that we do in a variable rate manner. And so those observations would be, if you grow lentils and it's a wet year, for example, people can lose 30% of their lentil crop in the low area, and for us those low spots are typically our highest yielding areas, and yet with lentils you might lose them and it might be flipped around. So it starts to ask the question, why are we seeding lentils in the low spot when, if it was a pea crop, for example, that's where our best peas would be. And yet on the hilltop, the peas don't grow very well when it's that dry, they're short, and they don't yield well. So it's just a matter of observing that those plants do better in different areas of the field, and let's put more of them there.
Because there are certain products you can't use on certain crops. You're putting a lot of that together. So how do you handle weed control?
Well, this one, for example, like pea, canola, lentils, so this is a clear field canola. Peas and lentils, obviously you can use Odyssey on both them. So if this was a lentil crop on its own or a pea crop on its own, we would have Odyssey as a weed control option. And, it's not super strong because the crop isn't that competitive. So a lot of your weed control also comes from your crop competition. And so the fact that we've got, a 1.5 times a plant count in this field, basically, 1.5 to 1 2/3 times a normal plant stand here, basically, from our seeding rates, that gives us extra competition than you would do in a monoculture. Because if you seeded your peas at 1.5 times, then you'd get lodging and disease and those type of problems. But because we've got different plants, we're able to have a higher plant stand, higher competition, and it allows the herbicide like the Odyssey to be more effective.
Yeah, and because in this situation, you're kind of, you like you mentioned, you're matching the crop type to the area of the field. That's another way that you're increasing that plant competition, not letting those weeds sort of have full reign.
Yeah, for sure. We've observed over the years things like canola, for example, is one of our more saline tolerant crops. And so we've observed in a pea canola crop, for example, where we had a check strip of peas, and where the peas started to come up to the saline area, the peas started to fade out and the kochia started to come up. But in the row beside that, where we had canola in the crop as well, the canola kept growing into that saline area where the peas stopped and kept the kochia under control, at least for quite a bit more distance until the salinity gets real extreme. But it definitely expanded that zone of production where we were able to get more productive crop and less weeds in that area.
We got peas and canola in this field. Harvest. Talk about harvest, because I think this, like I said earlier, this is the one that everybody jumps to in terms of like the roadblocks, the challenges, the reason it won't work.
And it definitely is the more challenging part. So when we started, we were just, the first year we just did a quarter section kind of thing. We were running a large drum cleaner, so it was I think a GT or a Hutch or something like that, sort of 4-foot diameter drum, 12 feet long. They work all right, but we were juggling augers to the bin, set up 2 augers, set up the cleaner, and then the bin fills up and you juggle everything around. Certainly not a practice for large scale. So over the years we ended up building a cleaning plant at home with a centralized handling system. And now we're just hitting the third stage of that, I guess, where as the farm is spread out, the centralized handling and bringing it home to clean is no longer a good option. And so we're currently building a mobile cleaner where we're going to separate these in the field and then haul them home as separate products.
Clearly, because you're committed to this practice, you're seeing results. And we're talking about profitable practices here on this series. So how have you measured the results? How do you judge whether, hey, this is working, we need to continue?
Basically, we put it in the spreadsheet at the end of the day and see what the net returns are. That's the goal of every business, I guess. And so yeah, those are the key metrics for us too, is really been the net returns out of it. And, the long-term benefits that we like to talk about, or the soil health or this and that, they're really hard to quantify. And, I'd love to tell you, yeah, we've got such and such a number is higher because we do this practice or whatever, but there's nothing I can really put down on paper to tell you that. But the net returns are pretty solid and indisputable, I guess. And so that's our main driver.
Truly a profitable practice.
It has been for us, yeah.
All right. And with that, thank you to Colin. Thank you to Sean. Super fascinating. We're going to take a quick break, and I will be back with Neil Townsend of GrainFox to talk markets right after this.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
When it comes to the productivity and efficiency of your operation, every decision counts. One of those decisions is how you fuel your equipment. You need to be sure that it will run efficiently and without unnecessary downtime. Count on Co-op and your local Co-op fuel team to keep your equipment running smoothly with seasonally blended high-quality fuels and premium lubricants with guaranteed performance. We are Western Canadian. We are fueling harvest. We are Co-op.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. And hey, you can join me at Inkerman in Eastern Ontario, September 7th at the Titans of Agronomy event by Savita International. Head to savita.com events for more. And yes, Savita International invites you to join this event, the Titans of Agronomy, featuring Peter Johnson, Albert Tenuta, Horst Bonner, and Greg Stewart, and commodity expert Bailey Elkinger. It is happening in Woodstock next week, August 31st. And as I mentioned, later, September 7th in Inkerman. Check it out. All right. We go now to talk markets with Mr. Neil Townsend of GrainFox, GrainFox market analyst. Neil, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Lyndsey?
I'm doing all right. Where should we start? It feels like, because of course Sean's been on holidays and I feel like he covers markets every second day. And so I feel like I'm out of the loop. So maybe we'll start with what's most exciting to you. What are you watching this morning, trying to figure out what's the most exciting thing?
Well, I'd say probably the U.S. Pro Farmer Crop Tour is the big issue right at the moment. I mean, generally speaking, the grain markets have been under some pressure in the month of August. It seems like the Russian-Ukraine situation, the Black Sea, sort of excited the markets in later July, and it's kind of been fading ever since then. They can bomb infrastructure and not really wake the market up. But yeah, so I think people are now it always comes back to the same place. It's one of those mysteries of agriculture where, you get a lot of noise, and then at the end of the day, you're most interested in what the U.S. corn yield is going to be.
Yeah, it is a bit interesting. Now, so here we are Wednesday. I'm hoping to, of course, check in at the end of the week when we sort of see where the Pro Farmer Tour sort of settles on things. I've been following along at least somewhat on Twitter. Has there been anything so far that's sort of been a surprise to you, or is it following mostly in line with expectation?
Well, I think it's variable. I mean, it doesn't look like a bin buster, but it's far away from a disaster as well. Some areas have looked a little better than maybe what people thought, but they're going to be getting into the heart of Illinois and Iowa and Minnesota here in the next couple days. I think one thing that could be interesting is the end of yesterday and today and tomorrow are supposed to be pretty hot. Not necessarily good weather for soybeans. And again, soybeans are notoriously hard to count. I mean, you get a pod count, and the pod counts have looked a little bit better than maybe what people were expecting. But that's by no means a direct correlation between, what they count on the Pro Farmer Tour and what the yield ends up. So it's still a wait and see approach. And the only X factor I would throw in there is just it is unseasonably warm right now, well over 90 degrees in Minnesota, Iowa, and parts of Illinois as well. So, and dry. So that is not generally considered good weather for, in particular, soybeans at this time of year.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. What is that? That rain makes grain, especially for soybeans in August. So we would like some moisture and maybe some cooler temps. Probably not going to get it. Let's back up just a little bit. I do want to talk about the Black Sea region as well. I mean, you make the comment that, it seems like news happens. It's not good news. And it's not necessarily having perhaps the impact that it used to have on markets. Is this because, that volatility factor has been worked in already? And we're just sort of rolling with it now? What would have to happen for it to have a huge impact?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point you make, because, I mean, is the volatility kind of into the mix? I guess a second question would be is sort of like overall macroeconomic weakness weighing on the market. And the big one would be just like there's so many doubts around China macroeconomically right now. The only counterpoint to that, which doesn't seem to really be impacting the market, is that the one sector of China that looks relatively bullish is the grains and oilseed sector. Like they continue to import a lot, and they continue to their domestic prices continue to be well above the world market. So when you look at the Black Sea, I mean, and the reason I kind of start with China is that a lot of the trading has been attributed to sort of like algorithmic trading from hedge funds and sort of like, do the headlines excite them or do the headlines not excite them? And I mean, in the world of analysts, if you just kind of look at some of the writings or the tweets or whatever, like there are a certain segment of analysts who are sort of surprised that like, and they're almost cynical and saying like, oh, like they're not paying attention to the Black Sea. Like this is a real risk factor, right? Mm-hmm. I would say this. I'd say that based on recent experience, last year there were, lots of risks. The biggest difference was that there was a formal grain deal. But even the 2 or 3 weeks in the last marketing year where the grain deal was sort of like not in effect, we saw that grain kept flowing out of there. And I think one thing the world probably learned too is that there's a lot of exit points from Ukraine, like overland, rail, sea, barges down the Danube. So, any attack that the Russians did would have to be pretty devastating to one component of that. And there's been definitely, again, I mean, I'm not belittling the attacks in any way. They're terrible and tragic, but I'm just saying that there hasn't been sort of in the last, few weeks, something that went boom big enough for the algorithmic traders and other traders to think, oh, we really need to put some risk on here or take some risk off, as the case may be.
Adapt, innovate, overcome. So send it overland, send it by barge, right? Whatever's going to work. You got crop to sell, you're going to try to get it there. So now let's bring it maybe a little closer to home.
And that's a good point too, Lyndsey.
Go ahead.
Because, I was just going to say that's a good point too, Lyndsey. I think the other thing that sort of happened was that the Ukrainian crop size or the perceptions around the Ukrainian crop size kind of went up at the same time that the Russian crop size sort of edged up as well. Mm-hmm. Even like a country like Kazakhstan sort of told us that they had a slightly bigger crop than what was expected. I mean, again, one thing to note, and this is something that really helps and relates to Western Canada as well, is that the quality situation in Ukraine and Russia and even the European Union is probably like below the 5-year average quality. So a higher proportion of their grains and oilseeds, or particularly the grains and wheat, has more like feed attributes than human quality attributes.
But perhaps more of it than was expected. So volume, but not necessarily quality, which, okay,
right.
Yeah, that's going to happen. So let's bring it home then. In Western Canada, of course, we're, edging into the end of August, certainly a lot of combines rolling. Some of them, I mean, I've certainly seen where really disappointing yields, others, pretty happy, especially with the year that they had. Where are we at? Well, maybe focus on wheat right now, seeing as that's our early indications. But what sort of sense are you getting for farmers as far as production this year?
I would characterize it as like, generally speaking, people are a little bit happy compared to what they thought might be out there. And this is broadly speaking. I'm not speaking about anybody's farm in specific. So they're happy compared to what they thought might happen, but these are below the 5-year average on yield. I mean, not 2021 by any means, but certainly not, there's some exceptional places where the crops are as big or bigger than they were in 22. But for the most part, somewhere between 22 and 21 yields, but, closer to the 22 yields in some places and closer to the 21 yields in other places. So I think we're just dabbling in the wheat, like the wheat's really just started here in earnest. And there is some small optimism that wheat might be one of the crops that will fare a little bit better than, say some of the other crops like pulses or oats or something like that, where maybe there will be a slightly larger national impact on the yield from the drought.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and pulses are one of those, certainly, I mean, they are concentrated in in certain areas and therefore when that area is under drought, it has just a huge impact on total production, just because it's so localized. Although I say that tongue in cheek somewhat. If anyone's ever been to the pulse growing region of Saskatchewan, it's huge. But relatively speaking, it is, one part of Canada that does it. So there is that. Let's talk canola, just touch on that as well. Where are things at? I mean, I think that there's been some discussion recently about, will we see the renewable diesel promise seen through? Are we going to get all this crush? Is any of that working its way into markets, or is it really all about supply and demand right now?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, first thing I'll say is, like, canola, I've just started to see, results on some very early canola yields. And those were not good. And one thing people said in the reportage back to me was that this was below farmer expectation. So, it's very small sample size. We'll reserve judgment. But, I think that, for the canola S&D, where the production estimate in Canada ranges from probably like 16 million at the lowest to 18 million at the highest, which is very, very wide range at this stage. Canola's just, there's not a great sense of where it is. You mentioned the renewable diesel. A great beacon of hope. I think, though, and this is just over the last couple of weeks, there's a growing sentiment that, the renewable diesel might be in the process of punting and sort of deferring a little bit down the line, because what they see right now, and we talked about it earlier, was the risky weather for U.S. soybeans. So if U.S. soybeans, they're kind of flirting with a 50 bushel an acre yield, the 52 is sort of like the target, I guess, is what you'd say. Now they're at 50, up or down maybe a bit. But if they finished under 50, that would be sort of bullish for the soybean oilseed complex. And the same thing with canola. We don't really know where the canola yield is going to go, but let's just say over under 17. I think if we're under 17, we're going to be in a pretty tight situation just with the regular crush and the regular sort of obviously smaller crop influence export program. But I am getting a sense in some of the reportage going around the renewable diesel plants is that there's a bit of deferral going on. Now, what we have to remember on the positive side is a lot of this is motivated by, at the state level in the United States, like California, Oregon, Washington State. And, definitely in the case of California, they've shown a strong willingness to, keep renewable diesel momentum going and really trying to break some of the linkages they have to the fossil fuels in terms of the fuel and gasoline and diesel supply. So, I think some plants are going to come online, but I think the big impact that we were maybe expecting in the last half or last quarter of 23-24 maybe will be a bit more subdued. But that's almost like a tip of the hat to the fact that, the abundance of soybeans and canola in North America maybe won't be quite where it's at. Now, one last factor to consider, and this relates back to something we mentioned earlier as well, is that, crude oil is sort of traded up to around 85, and now it's lost about $5 or $6 from there. And the sole reason cited for the $5 or $6 loss has been the poor macroeconomic data emanating out of China. So the world is really saying that we need the Chinese engine to pick up, to start up, and that's going to be bullish for a lot of factors. And in a tangential kind of way, but a connection, I think if China is more of a boom than a bust, you'd see a stronger rollout of renewable diesel sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Let's stay in that part of the world then just briefly. We did mention pulse acres. Canada, of course, a huge exporter of pulses, but not a huge crop out there this year. What are we seeing, at least from the India side? Are we seeing any great promise in crop flowing there anytime?
I think there's a lot of concern in India. Again, for such a big country with so many people on the ground there, the information doesn't seem to be, flowing too freely. But what we do know is that, they have some concerns, obviously, on the rice side. They had some concerns on the wheat side. They're still probably in attempted negotiations to buy some wheat. I think their preferred method of buying wheat would be government to government, like straight from Russia, so that it's a little bit quieter, I guess. They control the narrative a bit more. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they're intending to do. On the pulse side, they have had some sort of tighter supplies on some of the pulses, chickpeas in particular. The chickpea market continues to be really strong. What we have known, and there's more reportage on this today, more in details on this today, but the monsoon has been very disappointing, and it looks like it's closing down earlier than it should, which will have a direct impact on this crop that's coming. And, again, you mentioned it, rain makes grain. The final thing I'll say, just on the pulse side, it seems strange maybe to some listeners that we're going to bring up Australia when we talk about pulses, but they are somewhat of an X factor. And last year they had very large crops of pulses because, they had large crops of everything. It looks really that, as of mid-August, the drought is starting to have an impact in Australia. This is going to be a dry year. It's not going to be like the last three. There's going to be some impact of the El Nino and there's going to be a reduction in their production. And I think when you take the combination that India may be on a little bit of shaky ground and then less supply from Australia and a smaller supply from Canada, the pulse fundamentals look very supportive.
Mm-hmm. I have no idea how India feeds itself. I'll just put that out there. That's a lot of people and a lot of factors. All right, Neil, thank you so much, of course, with GrainFox. Thanks for joining me on the show today. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Lyndsey. Have a great day and good luck.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Introducing the Arion 600 Series tractor by Kloss, where versatility meets productivity head on, because you've got jobs to do. Mowing, tedding, raking, baling, loading, filling, tilling, cleaning, spreading, hauling, feeding. This is multi-purpose reimagined to do the work for you. It's more than just power. The Arion 600 tractor gets it done.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Wednesday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. And yes, we have reached the last segment of the show, but perhaps I've saved the best for last. This segment is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. Imitator stabilizer products claim dual protection, but do they actually deliver? Defend your UAN from nitrogen loss with Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services, offering superior above and below ground protection. See how others stack up at defendyourn.ca. All right, as promised, I do have a fascinating discussion between Kelvin Heppner and Rick Rutherford. Now, Rick is a longtime member of the agriculture community, a seed grower, and he's doing something quite different on his 6,000-acre farm in Manitoba, and that is he's essentially using it as a proving ground for a lot of technology. So to get a full grasp of what's happening on his farm and why he's chosen to do this, Kelvin caught up with him at a recent field day to discuss what Rick Rutherford is doing on his farm.
All right, for Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Heppner, and pleased to be joined now by Rick Rutherford, farmer here just outside of Gros Isle, Manitoba, northwest of Winnipeg. And Rick, your farm is host to the Emily project. It's known as Innovation Farms. Can you fill us in on what this means? I think people are seeing it happen, but are trying to, at least I know I'm trying to understand what the project is all about here.
Actually, the Emily Group has been working on our farm for 3 years. They had the vision to, I guess, for not a better term, they had a vision of a smart farm in Manitoba. Mm-hmm. And they liked their term was the Innovation Farm. So we had discussed a bit about it, and they had the vision that they were going to have this farm, and if they had 1,500 acres where they could work on new projects that were coming down it. And after the discussion, we kind of led into the way, and our team here thought that really what we really needed was, for all the new technologies that were coming out, we wanted it to be able to be proven on a commercial basis. So that's why the term comes from them. One of their buzzwords was, the 5,500 or 6,000 acre innovation farm. Well, it was really our idea was to push it there. If the thing can't work on a commercial farm, why are we beating ourselves down that path? So the Emily model is to take new innovation technologies, do it on a smaller scale, and if we like the idea and thought there could be some sustainability in it, we'd move it to the large bases and the large farm. And with the technology we have here, we can prove or truth a lot of the technologies that are coming down the pipe.
Do you have an idea of how many different companies or partners or technologies are currently being examined here?
It depends at what level. If you look at what the Emily Group is doing on their, I guess you say they're bringing the new technologies, and a lot of it, Emily is different from other smart farms. They're actually an accelerator. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the model, it's different from Moles. They are having new technology, people bringing stuff to them. And a lot of this stuff, some of it we can't even talk about it because it's in proprietary type of things, but they're looking at some of this technology that it's coming down to it. And I think they're part of the Pan-Pacific team, and I think one of the goals there is not to duplicate so much stuff. If there's application, sure, it looks good, but like Emily itself even has a capital enablement fund. So for startups that they look at it, it has some bases in it, they want to be able to help them with funding to bring it to the next level. But then, as I say, it works through it, and we've tested stuff with our technology years in, year out. To answer the question, we're actually doing things on our own that's not even within Emily, and that's because of our seed background. We look at new seed varieties, we look at crop types. Like one we're playing with on the farm basis this year is winter camelina, where the Emily Group is probably going to dovetail on it because they see the innovation behind it. So a lot of this stuff, we actually bring ideas together to somewhat look at it. That some stuff we will be doing here and some stuff that the Emily Group will be doing, and we talk about it and then say, like, where are we going to go to? And as I say, this is the first year we've been on a more of a broader scale. So we'll look at ideas and bring through it, but really the end goal is to bring products to the marketplace that's got sustainability and adds value to farms, no matter what it is, if it's nutrient management or what have you. And I think that's our goal is even our seed business that we run, we've always said that our success is driven by our customer success. And if we can't give them success things, that's not really what we're interested in.
Yeah. If I put my farmer hat on, though, Rick, I think I like it if things are simple on the farm, if I don't have too many salespeople visiting, I don't have too many outsiders on the farm, and I just like to get my work done and stuff like that. What's your response to that type of perspective that maybe other farmers share? And you obviously have a different point of view on that.
Well, we're looking for the next best thing that's going to be sustainable on our farm. And as running our retail business, if we have ideas that we can bring to our customers, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a leg up on our competition, no different than any other agribusiness. So that's one of our first initial things on it. And we have a term we refer to, if we look at a new technology, does it fit the criteria easy button? So we're talking to an easy button farmer here that likes easy things. So reality is how do we move, or how do we help the guys with some of this technology? Is it too complicated to check the easy button theme? And we don't begrudge that. It's just a natural thing that we deal with. Mm-hmm. So, and that's part of what we debunk is if it's low-hanging fruit and our easy button farmers like it, that's another thing it checks as our box too. And hopefully that we can save some pain and issue with some of the people, with some of the new technologies that are coming up, that we can just say, yeah, we don't see that there's any long-term benefit to that, and we can help our customer with that. I think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, it comes back to that gap between what's happening in the research world and what's happening in the practical, in the field world.
And that's our goal of the Innovation Farm, is trying to meld that together a bit. And it'll be interesting as we go on here. One of the things, as we were not negotiating but talking about it, as we've said, is some of the stuff that you're bringing to the table, and some of it, there's a ton of government investment in it, we think may not be practical, or it has no commercial viability. And one of the things that we kind of maintained so far, we'll see how it goes, that we could call some of this stuff out. And some of this stuff has got a lot of government funding. And if it's got no commercial really viability or sustainability, why is this Smart Barn or Innovation Farm would we want to promote it?
Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting as we go forward, because as you know, there's a ton of products on the biological side that's coming down down to type. And as I say, we've got 2 folders in our office. One of it's the snake oil one, and the one at work, and the one of the snake oil is pretty thick right now. But again, that's what we hope to do, is try to debunk some of this stuff for our customers.
All right. Both in terms of crop inputs like that, but also machinery and tech and all kinds of things that.
Exactly. And reality is we do use our equipment to truth a lot of stuff. Is it complicated? The technology is there, so we tell a lot of our customers, or try to promote our customers, yes, it's there, and this is what you can get out of it. And I think as we move forward, we see a lot of things starting to happen, even in the carbon market. If you look at carbon offsets have been the big buzz for years and years. We don't think they're sustainable. But if we can get paid for the insets or the things that we put into our land in an environmental friendly way, that's where it's moving to, and that's where this technology really comes into it. We have full data set in all our acres that we farm for 10 years, and they're starting to see quite a value in that. We haven't shared it in the past very liberally, but for research purposes, we've actually shared it, because in a lot of cases it's used blindly, but in the end of the day there is benefit in that data. And I think that's where you'll see technology and the move from people that have the technology from the easy side more into it. Because let's be honest here, if you were to receive 75 cents a bushel for every bushel of grain that you sold on your farm because you can prove what you put into your crop, I think it would change the look at it. Because, you start taking that, it could be $50 or $60 an acre over thousands of acres. Really, this stuff really starts playing at home. And I think that's what you will see, or that's one of our visions, as we say, is how it's going to develop over the future, is on the inset side of things.
Yeah, cool. It's fascinating, and I know we could talk about this stuff for a long time, Rick, but I did see your combine, one of your combines head down the road before, so...
That was a neighbor.
Oh, it was a neighbor? Oh, I thought it was one of yours.
Well, it was funny, actually, because the neighbor pulled in here with his pickup, and the guys jumped out of it to use our moisture tester. So I guess we've already harvested a bunch of crop here already. So, and it's interesting here. The moisture is so variable. Mm-hmm. Right at our home farm here, we've said 6.5 inches. Most of our combining has been done at a farm north of here. It's only 3 miles, and it only received 3 inches. Mm-hmm. So there's a wide variety of crop conditions even in our backyard here. But we look at our canola, soybeans, and corn is more in the wetter area here, and a lot of it looks fairly sharp. So that's our crop report, that the thunderstorm lottery is what you got.
Exactly. No. Thank you, though, for your time today, Rick, and thanks for the opportunity to visit your farm today.
I appreciate it.
All right, and with that, we reach the end of this Wednesday edition of RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, of course, to each of our guests, to Colin Rosengren, to Neil Townsend, to Rick Rutherford, and shout out to my buddy Kelvin Heppner for helping me out on this one as well. Hey, it is Wednesday, it is hump day, but you know what that means? Tomorrow is the Farmer Rapid Fire, brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. Super excited to hear what's happening out on the landscape across Canada on tomorrow's show. Friday, as per usual, we're going to have the issues panel. Kelvin Heppner will be on, and Andrew Campbell from here in Ontario. I'm also hoping to have a full report from the Pro Farmer Tour. Of course, you did hear from Neil Townsend today a little bit about what we're seeing on that tour. So be sure to join us on Friday. That's Friday, 4:30 Eastern, right here on Rural Radio Channel 147. If you've got any feedback on today's show or any of the other shows you've heard this week, would love to hear from you. You can call that RealAg listener line 1-855-776-6147. You can leave your feedback there. Or, of course, you can find us across social media. We are at Real Agriculture on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, just about everywhere. I don't know if I'm supposed to call it Twitter or X, but we're there too. And you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. I would love to hear from you as well. I am going to be back now, not all of next week. Next week is a little bit different, but Sean is likely not going to be here next week either. He might pop in now and again. And so I am lining up shows for next week. So if you've got some ideas or people you'd like to have on the show, want to hear from, anything you'd like me to dig into, I'm all ears. So zip me an email if you'd like to. All right. And with that, we'll wrap up today's show. I will be back tomorrow, as I said, with the Farmer Rapid Fire. Everybody stay safe until then. Bye now.